Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have another great show for you tonight. We have the founder of Enviro Textiles out of Glenwood Springs, Colorado. They're the nation's largest purveyor of hemp fabrics and other natural fiber fabrics. We'll be talking to their founder and CEO, Barbara Filippone. So Barbara Filippone has been in the natural fiber industry for more than 45 years. So we'll be talking to her about her company, Enviro Textiles. We have our hemp news segment coming up. And as always, we're going to start our show off with the infamous Dancing Cannabis Leaf.
I feel the force.
Okay, our first story tonight is from Maryland. Maryland's Democratic Governor Wes Moore signed legislation last week implementing a voter-approved referendum legalizing production, sale, and use of cannabis in Maryland. The measure, Senate Bill 516, permits existing medical cannabis dispensaries to apply for a fee for dual licensure to sell to adult-use marijuana markets beginning this July. Regulators would need to start approving additional marijuana business licenses by July 1st of 2024. The law allows for as many as 300 total retailers of cannabis products to adults to operate in the state of Maryland. Out of Washington, D.C., tax revenues derived from licensed retail sales of state legal adult use cannabis products totaled approximately $3.8 billion last year in 2022. These figures do not include revenues derived from the sale of medical cannabis products and or the collection of state-imposed regulatory fees like annual license fees. This is just the excise taxes. Adult use sales generated the greatest amount of revenue in California with roughly $1.1 billion of tax revenue, followed by Illinois, Washington, Michigan, and then Colorado. Since 2014, retail sales of adult use cannabis products have generated $15.1 billion in tax revenue. Because cannabis remains federally illegal as a Schedule I controlled substance, state licensed cannabis businesses are unable to take standard business deductions or access other standard tax breaks. As a result, the effective tax rates for cannabis operators is staggeringly high, regularly exceeding over 70% for retailers. In 2022, cannabis operators paid in excess of $1.8 billion in additional taxes. In 2023, the study's authors forecast that this excessive tax burden will increase to $2.1 billion. Because of this unjust financial burden, less than 25% of cannabis operators surveyed said they are currently profitable, a nearly 18% decrease from the previous year. Commenting on the study's findings, Whitney Economics chief economist Bo Whitney, a past director of Oregon's cannabis licensing, said, quote, "The cannabis industry is under extreme economic distress and the current regulatory and taxation environment is untenable, even in the short term," end quote. Whitney said that he believes several state markets are barely avoiding systemic collapse. Up north, across the river from here in Portland, in Washington State has become the latest state to ban pre-employment tests for cannabis. Washington's Democratic Governor Jay Inslee has signed legislation, Senate Bill 5123, into law prohibiting employers from taking adverse actions against new hires because of a failed drug test for marijuana. The new law, which takes effect on January 1st, 2024, states, quote, "It's unlawful for an employer to discriminate against a person in the initial hiring for employment if the discrimination is based upon A, the person's use of cannabis off the job and away from the workplace, or B, an employer-required drug screening test that has found the person to have non-psychoactive cannabis metabolites in their hair, blood, urine, or other bodily fluids," end quote. Washington joins a growing number of jurisdictions, including Atlanta, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and the District of Columbia, that have passed legislation limiting employers' ability to pre-screen applicants for past marijuana use. Nevada enacted a similar law in 2019. Several other states, including California, Connecticut, Montana, New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island, have enacted broader workplace protections limiting employers' ability to either test for or sanction employees for their use of cannabis while off the job. Another study in the percentage of high school students who acknowledge having ever used cannabis or who say they are current cannabis users has fallen significantly since 2011, according to data provided by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. According to a new CDC report, the percentage of high schoolers who've ever tried marijuana fell 30% between 2011 and 2021. The percentage of students who self-identify as current marijuana consumers decreased by a similar 30 percentage points during the same time period. Our next story is from Oakland, California. Over a third of Californians suffering from chronic pain acknowledging having consumed cannabis for therapeutic purposes within the past year. According to the Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs, researchers affiliated with Kaiser Permanente and the University of California, San Francisco surveyed a random sampling of pain patients enrolled with one of the state's largest healthcare providers. 35% of the patients surveyed said that they had consumed medical cannabis. Nearly 90% of them said that they used cannabis primarily to treat pain-related symptoms. Our last story tonight from Montreal, Canada. Cannabis is associated with sustained reductions in cancer pain and may be safely incorporated in cancer patients' regimens, according to data published in the Journal of the British Medical Journal's Supportive and Palliative Care. Canadian researchers affiliated with McGill University assessed the safety and efficacy of cannabis plant-derived in 358 cannabis patients. The study's participants consumed cannabis as an adjunctive treatment for 1 year. Subjects experienced significant decreases in pain within 3 months. The patients maintained their pain relief throughout the study. Participants who consumed cannabis flowers containing nearly equal percentages of THC and CBD experienced the greatest relief. That's the end of our Hemp News segment tonight. And if you or a loved one are looking for a doctor anywhere in the United States who can help you with medical cannabis and obtaining your state's permission or permit to possess, use, or grow cannabis for medical purposes, we have a doctor referral service and we can help you find a doctor. So give us a call at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. And now we're going to our interview with one of the primary movers in hemp fabric and natural fiber fabrics in the world. It's Barbara Filippone, the CEO and founder of Enviro Textile out of Glenwood Springs, California. So I hope you enjoy this very informative look with a groundbreaking pioneer, and I hope you will continue to work to restore hemp. Good night. Okay, here we go. It's my great pleasure to introduce Barbara Filippone from Enviro Textiles in Colorado. She has been pioneering hemp textiles for 35 years now. Welcome to Cannabis Common Sense, Barbara.
Thanks, Paul. It's natural fibers for 45 years and hemp fiber and for 33 years.
How did you get started 45 years ago in natural fibers?
My grandpa worked in a textile mill in New Jersey. He was an immigrant and he worked with flax fiber, which is very similar in the processing methods as hemp. So I'm really autodidactic is my education.
I see. So you absorbed it just being there.
Yes, I tried college, but I didn't want to be a starving artist.
I can relate to that. So When did you first start Enviro Textiles?
I believe 22 years ago, actually. Yeah, 22.
Okay, so about halfway through your career. What did you start doing 45 years ago with flax, and how did you come upon hemp? I know we both have a history in China, and so let's go through that if we can.
Well, let's start with the fact that in the early days, I was working in India, and based on the lack of environmental stewardship, the human rights violations, I walked away from that, and I happened to run into three guys named David at uh, the Las Vegas Women's Wear Daily show. And they had one garment on the rack that was hemp. And it was from Thailand. It was the Hmong tribe hemp garment. And that was around 1988 or so. And that's where it began. I asked them if their samples had not shown up, and they said, "This is the only sample we have." And then they showed me the fabric, and I said, "Well, I can design a garment with narrow goods," because I had went into fashion designing, working with natural fibers, or what I thought were natural fibers in India. Uh, I did the Earth Goods line. It was called the Earth Goods Earth Tribe. Then I was headhunted by a Chinese factory that Don Wirtschafter connected me with. I went to China right prior to the World Trade Agreement, and there was actually only two fabrics at that time. I've done project management for many of the hemp companies, like Ecolution, for example. But due to the fact that I was contracted to do the projects, I was always kept in the closet. But it was actually me opening up, and uh, I guess it was 3 years after the assassination of Ceausescu in Romania. So at the same time, I was working in China for a jointly owned factory that was owned by the Dutch and the Chinese government at that point. Summer just stepped in, who is my right arm and worked with the company since the inception.
Hi, Paul.
Hey,
So
good to see you.
this is um, so I could clearly see that we needed standardization and textile development, but it entailed also the growing practices in China, the harvesting, the degumming processes, the yarn developments, the sizing agents, all these things that I had experience in. So we didn't have I also worked in Canada the first 2 years that hemp was embraced and started in Canada, long before Hemp Oil Canada and Manitoba Harvest.
Well, there was a guy, Alex, who brought his stoneware in the late 80s. That's the first time I ever saw a hemp garment. It's like 89 or something, and it was just kind of
that was Jeff
shirt with some marijuana leaf metal buttons.
That was Jeffrey Stonehill, I think his name was.
Okay. I thought it was
Yeah,
Shoom. That's the name that comes to mind. But it's been so long. I mean, we're talking 34, 30 some odd years.
yes, yes. It's been a long road, and it's not my first rodeo in the legislation. I was with Senator Casey in 1995, but I really, given our time frame, we have to straighten out what's going on, and that's why I'm doing this. We've The word hemp has been so convoluted in America. Back in our day, it was cannabis sativa was industrial hemp, marijuana was cannabis indica. And I know this because my very first shipment into the country from Eastern Europe, I was held in US Customs as if I was a drug dealer. It was
So
craziness
they held
back
you
in those
personally.
days. Oh, yes.
Uh-huh. I remember when I got
And
in my first shipment of hemp paper in 1990, they held it, but they didn't hold me personally. They just made a bunch of jokes about it. Fortunately, they didn't incarcerate me. How long were you held?
oh, I was held in US Customs for about 4 hours
I see.
because they felt that the textiles that I was carrying that were packaged and labeled, the label had two hemp leaves on the label. So US Customs thought that as they lifted the garments out of this duffel bag, that they would find hashish at the bottom of the bag.
Ah,
And of course, I couldn't help from cracking jokes
right.
about it.
What year was that?
But they finally let me,
What
pardon
year
me.
was that?
Oh, Jesus, I'd have to look back in three passport
I
books. The I have no vacations.
yeah.
My passport books are full of working Romania, Poland, Hungary, um, well, Canada first, South Korea, China, all on hemp uh, developments because I could clearly see the future. We needed to start bringing back natural textiles because history repeats itself. I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have polyester. And of course, my parents were organic before the word was even spoken of.
Uh-huh.
So I was never allowed to wear synthetics. I was allowed to wear go-go boots, but I always had wool skirts, linen shirts. Never was I exposed to synthetic textiles. And now, later on in life, I understand why. But this program right now is to help straighten out the confusion that has happened in our country. And it was orchestrated. I'm not going to get into the acronyms that orchestrated it, but we have two industries going on. We have, and I'm not going to talk about marijuana because that's a whole nother thing too, but we've got this acronym craze of CBD, CBG, CBN, all this. In America, when people tell me they're growing hemp, the very first question I have to ask them is, are you growing a shrub or are you growing approximately 125 plants per square meter? And 95% of the time, it's a shrub.
Right.
And
Right.
they think that this shrub is going to produce fiber. And let's clarify that right now. It produces wood and bark. So when people are saying we're going to have hemp fiber, it's a double edge here. There's two things. Number one, it's not going to be true hemp fiber. But based on the latest terminology we're hearing in the green movement, we hear made from renewable bio-based plant material. Well, that shrub wood is a great alternative to make lyocell that is derived from trees that take 6 to 25 years to mature, to pulp, to make rayon, viscose. Lyocell is really the name. So it's confusing to a farmer when someone says, well, you can also get fiber. No, you can pulp it, you can make these fabrics, but when you test them, there's no plant matter detected. So we have a resource from the shrubs to make a textile, but that perpetuates the use of chemically processed textiles. Now, technically, there's two types of processing method, and one of them is progress, not perfection. So I'm for the use of the wood for lyocell. I'm all for it. And it's quite evident when I developed our brand called Hemp, because it's 55% true hemp fiber and 45% lyocell.
I see. Yep.
Now,
Still, that's the trademark.
so because yeah, that was registered in the year 2002.
Okay, that's right about time you started your company.
So, well, I developed it before that, but I knew that I wasn't going to name my company anything with the word hemp. I managed to get banking. I got SBA loans to buy real estate because it was enviro textiles, majority hemp, but also when I was developing the fabrics in China, I did the hemp cotton, hemp silk, hemp blends. The only reason it was at 55% hemp was there was two reasons actually. One was the cotton quota. If I had used more cotton than hemp, the cost would have been higher. I would have had the duties and a cotton quota cost. So, and it also had more function. Summer can talk about the fashion aspects of it much better than I, but my goal was to duplicate fabrics that were common to the US consumer, which were, jean fabrics, shirtweight fabrics, and utilize hemp and other natural materials to look like those fabrics that were polycottons, but were actually natural fibers. But my goal here is we have to get this naming correct. If we are growing for shrubs and for nutraceuticals or medicinal consumption, let's name it cannabis hemp. And if we're looking at hemp for fiber, filler, and food, let's go back to how we started, which was industrial hemp, but that's not going to work either. So agricultural hemp versus cannabis hemp. So our farmers are transparent. Our conversion supply chain is aware of what's necessary to create end products to be used in existing industries because the infrastructure is here. We don't have to rebuild or reinvent the wheel here. Um, Unless we think, or let's just say it takes 5 factories, 2 of which would entail purification systems for effluent waters, which are called closed loop systems, which is progress, not perfection. It's the same thing as processing lyocell, which is a good thing versus upcycling polyester or recycling plastic into our clothing. I'm all for recycling plastic and polyester, but don't use it in our clothing. Make bricks, make uh, building materials that have UV coatings and fire retardancy. Because I'm really a product developer. And it's not just hemp. I've done quite a bit. And if we have time, I'll fill you in. Industrial hemp, if it is planted the way it was historically intended, first of all, it was never planted, it was broadcasted.
And that's just the seeds out.
Um,
That's not planting it. That's just throwing seeds across the field,
yeah,
broadcast.
yeah, yeah. Now, today's market, I would planting is okay, but they're missing the biggest piece of equipment for planting these seeds. The seed has to be conditioned. And what we have in this country is what's called density sizing. That strictly removes the hollow seeds. That's it. Then it goes to color sorting. 4 years ago in China, oh, I better interject this. I was involved with building the first hemp seed dehuller for Canada. My job was to collect the seeds from various farms in Canada. And basically, I smuggled them into China, and machinery was developed to dehull the hemp seeds.
Well, I really like
And
the term agricultural hemp for food products, especially. Industrial hemp just doesn't sound like a good food product to me. Agricultural hemp is a better term. I agree.
yes, but we also have, if we allow the plant, and I am by no means an agronomist, but I do have common sense and experience. And uh, I, I'm, I'm, I'm just parroting some information I've gathered along the way. If the hemp is pollinated, it's going to produce seed, no matter what variety it is. But again, I'm not an agronomist, but it makes sense to me. Why wouldn't you want to yield 3 products from one crop? So the seed, number one, is first food. Now, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I was brought to China. The gentleman that built the dehuller for Canada gifted me just what I need, an industrial size machine, because the seed in America or whatever country it's coming from must go through this piece of equipment. And what this equipment does is standardizes the seed and mitigates the risk of the residue that's coming off the seed that does test high. Okay, that's a fact. Then once that machine, because in the early days of Canada, they had a contract with Walmart for bird seed. And what happened is the seed tested high at the border and they lost the contract. There was no leaf, there was no flower, it was the residue from the seed.
The coat that covers the seed.
Yes, yes. So agricultural hemp, industrial hemp, will produce seed that will produce oil that will produce a protein nut. That's number one. That's step one. The stalk consists of 85%. The core herd is not fiber. That is a high cellulose lignin, woody material, like the difference between a poplar and a hardwood. And depending on, again, going back to conditioning the seed, you have to have the same germination rates to create a standard stalk. So that 85% herd that's being used in hempcrete, great idea. Okay, but it's still not standard because I'm hearing from 3 serious general contractors that are saying to me, we're not seeing consistency in the herd. Well, that's because the seed that was planted was not conditioned to germinate at the same rate. And I'm simplifying this very much. So that herd is, we have some great products, hemp wood. We have filler for hempcrete. And I'm going to avoid hempcrete a little bit. That herd has a multitude of uses as fillers in other industries, and it's 85% of the stock. And the infrastructure currently exists, and so does the customer base. So what's needed for that herd, the infrastructural cost is lunch money compared to what it would cost to utilize the bast. The bast fiber is only, and this is a number we've used in every country, approximately 15% of the entire plant. And whether you are mechanically going to process it or degum it, you still only end up with 9% out of that 15%.
I see.
Yes, field dreading is not the way to go because you have environmental concerns, you have mold development. There's a lot of concerns with field dreading.
For our audience who don't understand, it was a traditional way that hemp had been laid out in the fields, and redding is akin to Old English rotting, and the bacterial action would help separate the herd fiber from the bast fiber, just for our audience's background.
Yes, thank you, Paul. They also use the word do-redding. Now, there's a lot of pieces in between, but let's just say we've got bast fiber. I'm seeing products coming out that look great. We've got non-woven batting material, but the economy of scale and the return on investment, that is going to be a niche market. because I've run into shortages in China for hemp twice in my 30 years there, because the bass fiber was being used for other applications, plus the fact that the United States, we don't have the spinning systems. And I'm going to work backwards to utilize possibly 3% out of the 9% usable fiber. And when I hear the word cottonized hemp, it gives me a headache. There's no such thing as cottonized hemp. I was literally, and I'm not going to say names, cracking a joke and said, watch, one day we're going to hear the word cottonized. And sure enough, 15 years later, that's the buzzword. Now, all of the cottonized hemp I have technically observed is 85% lint.
Oh, okay.
That's not going to spin on any system, but it will pulp. And that will lend itself to lyocell development, which is progress, not perfection. We've all heard of the company Linsing and the brand Tincell. This is a fantastic fabric. It's a non-toxic, as natural as we can get currently. So, yeah, and I'm all for it. It's the most popular fabric my company has sold since 2002, and we supply 74 countries. If anybody would want hemp in America, it's me. And I have the skills and the know-how and the technology for degumming. But if you look at it based on economics, logistics, scale, we're a long way off from that. Let's look at what Richard Rose has been preaching, and I've been preaching: food. Food. If Canada approved it for birdseed, why is there any question about the safety of it for animal feed? Because one of the things the Chinese told me when they gifted me this machine, and remember, I have to go through translation. They were stressing the point how your country has to look at food, the food supply, protein, your omegas, because after Fukushima, the deep sea fish oil was not considered safe for consumption for our omegas.
Mm-hmm.
Hemp is an ideal substitute. When you get older, we have to get our omega vitamins. Now, the protein in hemp seed, yes, this is an ideal supplemental product, because when I went vegan and started losing my hair from it, I just started eating hemp seed, and I was getting the protein that seemed to reduce the hair loss. But since then, I've had to introduce fish, because I was in the Forks Over Knives program, and I would love to be vegan, but I don't want to kill myself either. So in America, two grades, I wrote some notes about this. So, when I ask people, what percent, how much I work per square meter. I don't understand when someone says, I planted so many pounds in 500 acres. I would have liked to have been involved from the start of this and said, okay, why don't we try this variety, and this variety in 4 square meters broadcasted? Because never in my career did I ever see hemp drilled and planted, nor did I ever see hemp baled. It was never baled. It was sickle barred. It was stood in the fields, depending on the country, sun dried, and then it was put on flatbed. Well, in the field is where they would break it in a scutcher, which most of it was hand done back then because there were so many people in China. Um, and present day, let's just start with the history so that we can utilize what's already proven. Um, how much time do we
I
have,
think
Paul?
about another 15 or 20 minutes.
Okay, so we have 2 methods. Right now, United States, based on the fact that nobody is going to invest in 5 factories for 9%, 15% fiber.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because at the end of that, you're lucky if you have 9%, and out of the 9%, you're going to have 3 qualities of fiber if it's degummed. Because once you put it through the carding and the combing, you have different qualities of fiber, which require different spinning systems. And there's a lot of equipment in between that. Okay, that you don't just go abracadabra and you have degummed fiber, and the next thing you have fabric. There's multiple factories. And also, once the fabric is woven or knitted, you need an entirely different set of factories for the finishing of the fabric, which is scouring, dyeing the fabric, and that requires an entirely different infrastructure. So my guess, if someone wants to invest about $300 million on 15% yield from a crop, they need their head examined. Okay, so eventually there will be methods. But if we don't utilize what we have right now, which is feed and filler, we're never going to get to the fiber. What currently is happening, I'm all for the mechanical processing of the 15% fiber blended with wool for insulation, but I'm a product developer, so I have 2 questions. And when I ask those questions, I don't get answers.
Mm-hmm.
When I ask the people involved with the cottonizing of fiber, I don't get the answers to my technical questions. I get jokes. Well, this is no joke. I'm ready to retire, and I have other companies, but there's a passion in me and a destiny that I'm supposed to be doing this. And I'm going to give it another year, but hemp cannot stand alone. And I'm very happy about the USDA's BioPreferred program. I was an advisor to that program. I got a 20-year award. I've got a lot of awards for things that I'm really not quite clear what they were for. But I think at this point, we need a separate platform which is fully transparent. And in spite of the fact I don't eat pork or beef, we have to utilize the leather, the hides. And I'm proposing, which I started this 15 years ago, the UNFC. which stands for the United Natural Fiber Council, which will entail hemp, including its fillers. It will include other plant fibers that I've worked my entire career on. A good example is the 3M sponge that was called the Greener Cleaner. A lot of people saw it. I developed the surface utilizing agricultural waste that would have gone to burning, processing fibers from beverages, and developed the surface of the 3M sponge. I've developed alternatives to polyurethane foam utilizing agricultural waste from processing industries. We have to have a platform for at least another dozen materials that I'm about to introduce, because we have education is our wisest investment. And when I see propaganda posters of an ear of corn wearing a sweater that says corn will compete with cotton, I have issues about that. And, I have to limit my tongue for obvious reasons, because I would say I've been through more scrutiny than most in this industry. And I would rather have been in the marijuana industry. It would have been a heck of a lot easier than doing what I'm doing, because it shouldn't rock the boat. It should broaden the horizons of companies that just don't have the information. So if you have some questions, maybe we should do or need clarity.
Well, what
All
what
right.
I really want is let people know about your company. I've had people for many years ask me, where can I get hemp fabric? So I have been sending them Enviro Textiles, Glenwood Springs, Colorado. They have the best selection. They're the experts, and you have a whole range of different products. Let's talk. Let's talk about your products.
Okay. As far as hemp fabrics go, they're made in China. I have nowhere else to go. I did work in Romania, but they couldn't fill $1 million order. They still can't. I have products from Mexico. I have, and I'm going to generalize it. I work with a lot of agave varieties. There's 104 out of, or 109, and out of those, there's about 6 that not only produce fiber, but they produce feed. There's also kudzu, which is considered a noxious weed in the Carolinas, which if I had my hands on it, we would have a number that's very similar to silk. There's so much over the 30, 45 years. I have to code them, and I code them Fiber X, Fiber C, because I am protecting the farmers and the entire chain until it gets into the hands of the end user, because I've watched too much control by the end buyer dictating to the conversion chain, we're going to keep this transparent and we're going to keep it as pure as possible. And I have my way of doing it. And I'd say I'm old enough and wise enough to say it's my way.
Right. I know you. We talked a little bit about hemp cell. You have hemp upholstery fabrics, canvas, Hemp silk blends. When I first went to China in the early 90s and late 80s, they introduced me to some of those hemp silk blends. I didn't go into that. I focused on paper primarily because of a mutual person we know, a competitor who sabotaged it. But you've got hemp knits, you've got stretch knit fabrics, hemp muslin, hemp linen, hemp twill. Tell us
Yeah.
about your various fabrics, and then you also have products like men's t-shirts and women's t-shirts and kids t-shirts and things. Uh,
Yes. That's Summer's area.
uh-huh.
Summer's sales. She is really the voice of the company. I'm, as she calls it, the Einstein. And Summer has supplied numerous films. And if I don't know whether she can step in because I honestly, I don't participate in that part. I'm the technical. But at my very first customer, and back in the day in China, there was the summer cloth. Remember?
Yeah, I do.
Well, I had to redo that because the sizing agent would burn your eyes. It was alum, it was a spice. So I changed that. But my very first customer for hemp was Volkswagen in their pop up vans. And that was around 1994.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And then Ralph Lauren. But Summer's the one that's opened the door to the presidents of the United States. She's gotten us in the Pirates of the Caribbean. And the latest film that everything in it is hemp is Woman King. A lot of other films. I work more with the very large companies that want to eliminate carbon fiber, fiberglass. And of course, I can't disclose their names, but we're having incredible success with hemp combined, the bast fiber combined with fiber X and fiber C, which is already of scale in other countries that we do not have political conflict with. Um, One of the other products, which was quite interesting on in Mexico when I get headhunted to projects. So it's not like me looking for projects. And in Mexico, I was brought down there because the tequila industry had so much waste.
Yeah.
And one of the first products I saw was after the first distilling tank. There was a very syrupy material, a liquid in the tank. So at that time, there was so much talk of biofuel. I said, let's check it out, get it tested. I brought it back to the United States, and it turned out that it contained serpentines, which lowers the blood sugar in type 2 diabetes. So it was a food product. So I'm the one responsible for agave.
Well, when my wife buys bottles of agave syrup, I will remind her of that for sure. And
Yeah.
you're also introducing enviromedical supplies. Do you want to tell our audience how cannabis fibers and hemp fibers help in medical supply?
Well, at this point, my tests from I did one of the first, I believe I was the first in America to test the antibacterial properties of the hemp. And currently, I have to re-perform a lot of these tests because all this genetic messing around with a plant, I'm concerned we may not test the same anymore. But it is anti-static, which is proven. It's the antibacterial properties. Well, obviously, it has some because you can wear a pair of hemp socks for 5 days and get no odor. It also has an SPF factor of 15, but again, I would like to retest these things. And I have done all this out of pocket, and I need financial support. So, the resurgence of the hemp industry, Summer and I were very naive when we were approached by, let's just say, a massive amount of characters. The majority of them got the boot from me, but they also caused a lot of conflict for envirotextiles. So now we're quite cautious who we talk to. Envirotextiles is the model for the future.
I agree. And I have, our mutual friend Don Wirtschafter and I were talking about if any person on this planet deserves to have the kind of resources that the public markets can offer, it is you and your business, Envirotextiles. You've been on the cutting edge, not just of your own company, but these other companies that have gone to the wayside or are still in existence. So, we're
Yes.
So
yes, Paul.
we're going to
Yes,
talk more
there is no one.
when we aren't on the show here. But I do want to say thank you for all your work and pioneering this and dealing with the male-dominated world and all the prejudice and that you faced in your long career. We are about out of time now. We want to put in a plug for envirotextiles.com. Just go to their website, look at all the different products they have, and we're definitely going to have you back on the show, and we're going to have Summer as well. I haven't ever interviewed Summer. I've ran into her at a number of different conferences, so it'll be great to talk to her too.
She's fantastic. She has opened the doors to the world to understand what natural fibers are.
So thank you for taking the time for this interview. I really appreciate it. I know you're busy with international travels. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing? We've got maybe 1 minute to go.
I'd like to say, young people, when you ask a question to one of us OGs, let us finish the answer.
All right.
Thank you.
Point. Good point. Thank you.
I hope.
We had Barbara Filippone on from Glenwood Springs, Colorado, the home of her company, a beautiful town, I might add, in envirotextiles.com. Thank you for coming on, Barbara, and we'll be talking more in the near future, I'm sure.
Okay. All right.